our moderator, Rachel Ski.
Good afternoon. All right, everybody's had their coffee. Avoid the post-lunch sink here, hopefully. We are going to have a very lively discussion, I'm sure, this afternoon about tobacco and flavors. And I know that this is quite a controversial issue for a lot of people, so we're going to introduce a lot of different perspectives, and then we hope to have a very constructive conversation. Please feel free to ask questions online in the app. You're welcome to come up to the microphones and ask questions. The primary focus here is to talk about some of the data related to how people use flavors, to also talk about some of the perceptions and representations of flavors when it comes to tobacco products in the marketplace, and as well as some of the surveys. So we have a great panel for you here this afternoon. We hope that you will engage and ask questions, but please understand if you don't ask questions and I have a lot of extra time at the end, there may be a pop quiz. So, I'm going to pass this on to some people like pop quizzes.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to start here with Ian Jones. He comes from ARAC with an extensive background in flavors and studies, and he's going to present some very interesting data that hopefully will give you a lot to think about.
Thank you, Rachel. And I just want to say thank you to the FDLI team for putting this together and getting us all here for this panel. So most appreciated for you guys for organizing this. And Tony and Dave, thanks for joining me. Just appreciate being able to be here with you guys. So with that, I'm going to jump right in. And so over the years, there's been much controversy and discussion over the impact of flavors on whether or not they are APPH. And it's CTP's job under the Tobacco Control Act to determine whether a candidate product is appropriate for the protection of public health. And this has been done, and I anticipate it will continue to be done, by weighing the benefits of a product against the risks. And typically in the behavioral space, when participants are actually using the product, the benefits are whether a participant quit smoking, so CPD is 0 in the last 30 days, or whether they reduced their cigarette consumption by at least 50% or greater. And these benefits are typically compared against risk, the predominant risk being youth usage and non-user initiation. And as I'll discuss here in a little bit, we've actually taken a little bit one step further to include risk being whether or not participants actually increase the number of cigarettes they're smoking whenever they're participating in these studies. Because as I'll show you here in a little bit, there are certain instances where we actually do see an increase or a detriment to the population health, depending upon which products participants are actually using. So just a little bit of preface here. Some of this data is self-selected. All of it is from our studies that we've conducted in about the last 1.5 to 2 years. There's a number of factors in here in these studies that I'm not going to go into, so there's a lot more details involved. So if you'd like more details on the specific methods, some of the other conditions that we included, etc., please come talk to me after or ask the question during the actual discussion. But while we disagree with the unlawful selling of products, we're a consumer-focused organization, and we are focused on tobacco harm reduction. We care ultimately about what's going to get people to switch from high-risk products to reduced-risk products and ultimately benefit their health. And so while most options today are tobacco tasting under the legal and authorized options, the only other flavored option that exists is a menthol-flavored product. But when you look at the market, 90% of the market, or estimated 90% of the market, is illicit flavored products. So the first step when we need to consider whether or not flavors are beneficial to the actual population is to look at the marketplace and see what's going on. And when we see numbers of like 90% of flavored products still being on the market illicitly, that should be flag number 1 to whether or not flavors actually play a role in public health. But when we go to the scientific data, it's really important that we actually evaluate when these participants or exclusive smokers are using these, do they demonstrate a benefit? So we've taken some studies here, and you'll see 3-month data and 6-month data. And these are just the quit rates. So what you're really looking at here is the pink bars. That's going to be your bars of interest. And these are participants that were assigned to a condition that had access to both flavored products as well as tobacco tasting products. In other words, they were given sort of a market choice. So they were given free choice to determine which products they wanted to use against a group that only had access to tobacco tasting alone. What we see is that after 3 months or 6 months, pretty unanimously, the flavored group that has access to flavored products consistently outperforms those who only have access to tobacco tasting products alone. However, what's interesting is this is only one way to look at and evaluate a benefit. So if we look at the quit rates, that's just one way to do things. We could also include those who reduce by 50% or greater, and we have in our data, and we continue to see the same thing. But what happens in a case like study 310 after 6 months where we actually see the opposite? It looks like the tobacco tasting group outperformed it according to the quit rates. So we actually saw that the tobacco tasting group had higher quit rates in this one specific study. So how then should we consider or evaluate the benefits of the flavored products in this scenario? Should we immediately say that there was no benefit? Well, one way to do this is with the condition where we give them that market choice, where we enable them to self-select what kind of flavors they want. So what we do is we ask them at baseline, hey, what flavors do you think would be most beneficial to you or to help you stop smoking? And when we do this, we can see that unanimously, gotta use the right button, we can see unanimously that the participants self-select the actual flavored product. So they believe that the flavored products are going to help them before they even get into the study. What you'll notice, the last three on the topmost image with the pink bars are the tobacco tasting variants. So right out the gate, we see that the participants are less likely to believe or less preference of the tobacco tasting products. When we follow up with these participants 6 months later, just to see where are you now that you've self-selected what flavors you're using, we do see some participants, 2%, that actually select a tobacco tasting product and stop smoking with it. So there are clearly individuals that do prefer a tobacco tasting product and benefit from it. But when we give them that free market choice, we see very stark differences of 12 to 22% of the participants. So even in the case where we saw from a group-to-group level that tobacco tasting was just a damn good tobacco tasting flavor and helped produce the quit rates that we saw, whenever they have access to flavored flavors, they still take those over the tobacco tasting variants. And so this is just a slightly different way to evaluate the benefit. But what happens in a case where we have, say, an age-gated device? How then should the risk-benefit relationship or ratio change? Well, in my opinion, the risk equation side of that equation is going to substantially change, because one of the most important things about the risk is the risk to youth usage. Now, age-gating technology may or may not work, and this is ultimately going to be up to the device and the technology behind it. But assuming it does work, then by necessity, the risk to youth should go down to 0. And so, in my opinion, because the risk equation has changed, then the benefit side of the equation should also change. When we talk about risk, it's a zero-sum phenomenon. Youth are using it, youth are not using it. Whether that's 5%, 20%, 30%, etc., it's just, are the youth using it? That's a risk. But on the benefit side of the equation, you have to meet this arbitrary 50% or greater benefit. Why not any benefit? When we're evaluating whether or not a product is beneficial versus risk, it should be any level of risk against any level of benefit. Particularly, this is important with an age-gated device because the risk to youth is substantially and markedly lower. When we look at the data in this way, and we also consider whether or not a product is leading to an increase in cigarettes per day, we again see support from the flavored products. Specifically in this example study, we saw that the benefit was substantially higher, and there was a higher likelihood of the participants that used an FDA-authorized tobacco tasting product, as well as a tobacco tasting product under PMTA review, were more likely to have increased the cigarettes per day that they were smoking than when they first started, showing an actual risk to the health population, which is not often considered. So whenever FDA is evaluating and authorizing these products, FDA should reconsider the risk-benefit equation based upon and in light of new data. And this should continue to come into light as we continue to evaluate youth usage. And with these reduced risk products, that benefit to risk equation needs to change. Thank you.
Absolutely. So next up, we have Tony Abu. He's from the Vapor Technology Association, and he's going to give us his insights related to flavored tobacco.
Is this on? You guys can hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. So this is the title of our panel, and I guess I'm taking a position here as far as the main question, a hint of harm or harm reduction. I think that we've had significant harm in the way that flavors have been addressed, particularly what is, I think, a demonstrated fictitious flavored vape and youth connection. And that has been used to deprive adults of smoking. So one of the things that I was asked to do is kind of look at the data on youth. And you've seen this type of graph in multiple formats, but it is the same. This is CDC data over the last 11, 12 years, and you can see the rapid increase from 2017 to 2019, where we had the youth vaping epidemic. But then you also see this radical decrease over the last 5 years since that time. So if we kind of drill down, and I think importantly, the two lines at the bottom are often overlooked, and that is the frequency of daily, or what's called frequent vapors, right? We are now looking at numbers that are significantly lower than they ever have been, but also this is the area of concern, I think, when we think about youth. In other words, a kid who tries a product once in the past 30 days, which is what the top line represents, doesn't present the same concern as those in the 1.6% in the green line. And I think if our policies were designed towards those, then we would actually be achieving something rather than what's happened in the past, which is flavors are attractive to kids, we have this big youth vaping epidemic, and we must eliminate flavors, which has been the calls for many stakeholders in the industry or that are involved. So this is what we saw. And when you take into account the COVID shutdown, you just see this continuing decline in that top line use rate. Now, what happened during this period of time that might have something to do with that? Big brands voluntarily pulled their flavors from the market, started in 2018, some then did so in 2020. Then in December 2019, President Trump raised the age to buy all tobacco products to 21. That was something that our association aggressively pushed as an alternative to banning all flavored vaping products, which was the question before him at that time. And I would contend that had a lot to do with it. And then the next thing that happened was the flavor guidance, effectively, which eliminated flavored pods, which was a little bit easier because the big brands had already pulled their products off of the market, so it made it easier for him to do. But he also exempted flavored disposables and flavored open systems. So looking at the same graph, in terms of what happens, we see that youth vaping has dropped 71%. And then we have heard a lot of discussion about flavored disposables. And they went in the opposite direction. Some people say that they're now 70% of the marketplace, okay? Now, what this should tell people who are concerned about flavors or a particular device type and the youth vaping rate is that they really are not connected in any material way. You don't have to be a statistician to see this empirical lines say one does not connect to the other. So the next question is, what do the kids say about vaping in this National Youth Tobacco Survey, right? Really interesting stuff, not only in the way the questions were asked, but in their answers. So in 2016, it was reported that kids say that that the fact that the product was flavored was one of the reasons they used that product, 31% of the time. But as you can see, it was still number 3 on the list. Now advance to 2019, and it's still in 3rd place, but it's dropped significantly to 22%. Then something interesting happens. In 2021, it drops dramatically to the low teens, and it stays there in 2022. And if you just look at these side by side, it's fascinating not only to see the questions and how they may have changed, but also what are the real reasons. And this constant narrative about flavored vaping products being marketed to kids and being the only thing that we need to be concerned about means we're not addressing any of the other reasons that youth say that they are vaping. The other interesting, and then the last point is that last data point is only 6.4% say flavors are the reason they are currently vaping in the last set of data. I ended it, the reason there are gaps there is because they don't always publish this information in the MMWR. So this is what we have access to. The other interesting thing they get asked is, what's the brand that you usually use? Okay? And this is how it breaks down over the last 5 years. And we kind of looked a little deeper, and you see some legacy brands kind of perennially on this list, but and Enjoy probably is definitely not in that category because it doesn't appear on the rest of the list. But when you overlay it with the kinds of device types, because that's become a big part of the discussion, you see a mix. First it was all pods, then there were some disposables, and clearly disposables have become more prevalent in the marketplace, but we are still talking about youth, a much smaller number of youth using these products, and then this is how they break down the different groups. So, good news, just to sum up, it's our view that the vaping epidemic, youth vaping epidemic, has been resolved, but we still need more marketing and access restrictions. It's pretty clear that there's no connection between flavors and youth. We know adults love flavored vapes, they love flavored everything, and they've demonstrated they love kid-friendly flavors, whatever that means. And we have studies that have shown that the mere availability of vapes can help people, actually cause people to quit smoking cigarettes. The bad news is we've been suffering through still a de facto flavor ban, always focused on youth, NPOs always focused on youth. We still have many stakeholders calling for eliminating adult access to flavored vapes. And we also know from science that imposing these restrictions increases smoking. So at the end of the day, we are stuck with a situation where we have millions of smokers and millions of vapors, and in a regulatory scheme which has authorized literally a handful of products. It might be 10, it might be 12, it might be 8 on any given day, but the bottom line is prohibition doesn't work, and this notion of prohibiting flavored vapes should be tossed out in the trash. Thank you.
All right, so Dave Dobbins from Dobbins Consulting is going to be next, and he's going to share his thoughts on this as well.
I should have put a slide up. I pretend like I have Tony's slide that shows like the rates as they go up there, but we all know that pretty well. No, we're okay. I want to talk about how in 2025, I think the regulator should be thinking about flavors. And no, I say in 2025 because I'm going to do something a little rare here. I'm going to give the FDA a bit of a break. When 2018 and 2019 came around, we had something that was unknown, new, in many ways sui generis, in that we had a brand new nicotine delivery product that caught on like wildfire with kids. There's just no getting around it. The combined NYTS number of rise school and middle school was around 20%, as your slide showed in 2019. It was around 27% for high school students, which suggested as kids got older, they were more initiation was occurring. And I think really what you're looking for is what's the initiation look like at around 18, and how much of that is casual use versus actual day-to-day or frequent use, which numbers were still pretty low. But there was also good reason to believe at that time that there was a possibility that vapor use would convert to cigarette use. And I think for those of us that ever smoked in our life, that was a real fear. I've said this many times, although it was clear to me when I tried Juul that it was just magnitudes better than the first generation e-cigarettes that had been on the market. That it was like kind of close to a cigarette. It just wasn't anywhere close to an actual cigarette, at least from a former smoker's point of view. And I always thought, well, the kids figured out that there was Marlboro. Our Juul problem will be over real quick, but we're going to have a big cigarette problem because, you know, that seemed like a logical place to go. And what happened is that concern turned out not to be true, because I had completely underestimated the good work that had been done in public health. One, to de-glamorize, and in some cases I think with some bad side effects, stigmatize smoking, but also just made it harder to smoke. Taxes, I think clean indoor air is a huge element of this. And kids just didn't go back. And, you know, as my kids told me, only losers smoke. And this was in the height of the Juul controversy. And I think the FDA acted reasonably. I think the pod flavor ban made a lot of sense. I think 21 was incredibly important. But then something has happened over the next 6 years, and Tony's story is the right story. Despite an aspirational wish to make flavors go away. Here in reality land, flavors are all over the place. We can, I'm sure, any one of us could walk no more than 300 or 400 feet from this building and be able to buy a flavored vape. And that's true everywhere. In Massachusetts, where flavored vaping is illegal, I make it a habit to go to vape shops wherever I go. You can buy a flavored vape wherever you want. And you have to do this. You have to use these magic words. You got any flavored vapes? And then you can buy one. You know, so it's a joke. And it just has come, so that part, prohibition doesn't work. The second thing we know is we have an environment where flavors are completely available basically to anybody who wants them. And despite that environment, the rate for high school students in NYPS is now under 8%. And back in 2013, when e-cigarettes first came out, it was higher than, nobody was getting worried, nobody was running around like their hair was on fire and this is the worst thing that ever happened. People were talking about the real harm reduction potential of these products and like having a reasonable conversation. So now that the facts have changed, why doesn't the conversation change? And I think so much of what has been done, and this was brought to my attention by Clive. It was a blog about something else, and I won't say what the policy was, but it really sums up how flavors work. It says, some bad strategies are the result of incompetence, miscalculation, and inattention. Most fail to consider how other key actors will behave. But the worst are the result of bad theories so detached from reality that efforts are directed towards efforts that are achieving goals that are unattainable, employing methods that are bound to fail. And that is what's happening here. And when you pursue a fantastical goal that can't be achieved, you start adopting policy measures that become iatrogenic to your goals. So let's imagine, and I share this goal, that you don't want kids to use e-cigarettes. Would you prefer a group of manufacturers that have engaged in a regulatory process, are responsible to a regulator, have to report to a regulator, if their products start causing trouble, will be brought in to be scolded by the regulator, to have conversations with the regulator about how they will fix those problems, and act in what I've just described in a regulated market? Or would you rather pursue a fantastical option that creates an inevitable black market, and one that, and I really respect the efforts of people trying to stop it, but one that's incredibly hard to stop just because of physics. It's more than just moving shipments from boat to boat. It's the fact that what used to have required a container filled with cartons of cigarettes, there are a couple of shoe boxes worth of material. The physics of stopping that coming into the country is incredibly difficult. And until there are like major money fines and jail time, which I'm not sure there's really any political will to do, that will keep happening. So my suggestion here is that let's operate on the facts of today. We have low youth vaping rates. I love your study. Was it study 305 or study 310? Because what study 310 tells us is there's more to consider than just how effective is a particular flavor to a particular group of people. It's if you present flavors to the entire universe, how many people will use them? And if only 10 people will use cigarette flavored and it has a 50% chance of working, you tell 5 people. If you have a flavor that only has a 20% chance of working, by the way, I'm drastically undercutting here, but if you present it to 100 people, 20 people have quit. That's great. That is reach. And we have to accept that. Now, of course, for the same reason that kind of reach which is good for adult smokers, it does present risk to kids because it's the same thing. There's some kids who'll never try tobacco. Maybe they wouldn't try cherry, but maybe they will try mango, and you have this issue. But I do think we've shown, and what does the current environment have? 21, which against all expectations most people seem to follow. You have an environment where these products are really not marketed anywhere other than in store, just because they're completely illegal. Nobody's running, television ads to try to sell them. And because of that, you have relatively low youth use. And also, just I would point out as the last thing, the culture has just changed. There was a moment in 2018 and 2019 where this was the new, exciting thing. But that was a huge part of why this was a fad. We didn't know that then. We didn't know that it was a fad or whether it was going to be a continuing problem, but luckily it turned out to be. And as the last just fact I would point out, we also know that flavors are not required to create high levels of use. In 1997, 37% of high school students were smoking. Plain old smoking made you smell like you visited hell cigarettes. And it didn't take flavors to get them to do it. And I would just keep that in mind. This is an issue that can't be reduced to one cause, one answer, one solution. It is a series of complicated trade-offs, continuing experimentation, and continuing work. And that is what a regulated market should look like. So that's my plea for the future, and hopefully the opportunity for the FDA as it continues under the leadership of Dr. McCary, who said today some magic words, but I will use two of them: common sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. I would also very much like to thank Dave for sharing this secret phrase that gets to the flavored vapes. I'm on the outs, I don't know this information. So I really would like to encourage people to get up and ask questions. There are microphones in the room. If you have questions that you'd prefer to submit online, I promise not to call out your name when I ask the question. Please.
Hi, Vince. Love this. What seems to be happening here is moving towards like a real-world version of appropriately protection of public health. That's what I particularly liked about your study was this idea that you can't just look at a prevalence like you're doing a clinical trial on a medicine. You have to respect the volition of the user who can choose to use a flavored product and or to use a tobacco flavored. And as Dave was saying, the tobacco flavored product that no one wants to use isn't much use from a harm reduction point of view. But can I suggest maybe three additional areas in real world? First of all, the respective sizes of the populations are hugely different. There's about 55 million adult tobacco and nicotine users, and about 2.5 million maximum, school student users. So that's a huge. The effects are happening in a much larger population numbers. Second area is counterfactual. Some of these kids that we worry about taking up vaping would, in a world without vaping, have taken up smoking. Okay, now, so for them, the flavours and the uptake of vaping is beneficial from a public health point of view, yet we've somehow excluded that category of people from a real-world APPH. And then finally, another kind of counterfactual thing is that what happens when you don't approve something, when you say this isn't APPH? What's the response from the people who would otherwise have used that? Do they smoke? You banned all the flavoured products. Do people smoke instead? Do they use the tobacco nicotine flavoured? Do they go to the illicit market? And at the moment, we kind of assume that what they're going to do is, more homework and violin practice, and not take up vaping instead. So I think the panel's great, but I think that idea of moving APPH, which is non-negotiable, as in the Act, towards a reality-based approach is one way to go. I'm sorry to talk for so long. Reactions, please.
No, you raise an excellent point. I mean, I think that one of the things that we're seeing and that we've seen in the data that's being presented is that not every youth that tries vaping becomes a tobacco user. But we have 30 million people in this country that smoke every single day. So how do we balance that when we talk about appropriate food protection and public health?
A lot of it's transitory.
Exactly. How do we prove a negative that somebody who tries vaping will not become a user in the future as a youth when we're faced with 30 million people who are actually users and need better options for better health outcomes that can't all be just, you should just quit. So.
Oh, I like that point. A reality-based APPH, I agree, and that kind of follows the common sense approach that we heard earlier. To answer your question about what people do when the product isn't available, we've actually conducted studies where we've extended the study. We had previously, said we're going to do a 6-month study, and then we extend it to see what happens. Most of them go back to cigarettes, which is really sad and unfortunate to hear. But a lot of them, they'll go try another product, and they might go pick up a tobacco-tasting product, and they're a participant that was using a flavor, and they'll report back as, this is the nastiest thing I've ever tasted. Why would I use this when I could just smoke my cigarette? So the majority of them just go right back to smoking cigarettes, and they don't go home and do their homework or look up. Or if they do, they read misperceptions about these reduced risk products from somebody else that is spouting whatever else they've read from somebody else, and the misperceptions continue to spread. We see that a lot with our participants.
Those teenagers are playing Fortnite. They're not.
Yes, exactly.
It's not happening.
I don't know what your kids do, but mine are not. The problem is obviously with the standard itself, the way that it is laid out, and also the way it's been implemented. I mean, the ability that the agency has used, the subjectivity that it has taken upon itself to use its regulatory power to set up the most bizarre scenario where a honeydew melon flavored vape has to prove that it has a greater success rate of helping people switch than that same company's tobacco flavored vape, right? Both unregulated, both unauthorized, because their applications were filed at the same time, and no apparent connection to really, at the end of the day, smoking. So once flavors were put in that little bubble and treated completely differently, and then we thought menthol and mint would be treated in its own little bubble, but then it just got smushed into one big amoeba of flavors. That's when the game was fixed at that point. And the detriment, of course, is what scientists talk about when you look at states that have restricted flavored vaping products. Not even banning them, just restricting them causes that increase in smoking. So the imbalance has been lost because the regulatory standard is so opaque. It can be used in any way, and it has been used in this way, which doesn't seem to resemble anything like common sense. That has to change. Like, this is not just a matter of we wake up one day and we have new leaders and they say, oh, we like flavors, we want to do more. This regulation is basically set up for this kind of failure. And you've had so much emphasis and work already done within the agency that who knows where it would come out if we saw what decisions were actually being made or have been made. So I think that there is a right opportunity for change, and if we don't take this opportunity and create a truly regulated market, then we're just going to be dealing with this problem in an even worse context, which is the black market. Or we won't have to worry about the black market because people are just buying cigarettes that have gone through no approval processes.
I mean, I obviously agree with Clive. I know what won't work, which is an all-out flavor ban. That I can understand why people wish it would work, but we now have, many years of real-world evidence that it won't. actual regulated market, where you can hold manufacturers responsible and you can restrict marketing practices so they're directed towards adults, and you can know what's in the ingredients in the products, and you can have, like you do in other regulated industries, a real back and forth between the industry and the regulated party. And I get it, it's distasteful, it's addictive. Cigarettes are really, really bad, and the hangover from knowing that is a barrier. But as I sort of garbled this quote, the pursuit of an impossible objective just creates knock-on effects that are terrible. I mean, look to Australia, where if you have an illicit vape, possession of an illicit vape can land you 2 years in the slam. Of course, nobody's put anybody in the slam for 2 years for having an illicit vape, because there'd be an immediate uprising, because it's absurd. But in that environment, what's happened is, and you think Australia, well, surely they can control their borders, it's just a big, gigantic island, maybe we can get that under control. Nope, plenty of vapes, run by, in a much more vivid sense, by actual sort of mafia-style criminal concerns that, you know, are so happy with their market that they're happy to literally firebomb places where you can buy cigarettes so you can get rid of competition. It's just, your alternative is insanity. So, given that that's your alternative, why not try something? Why not, you know, and I get it. Do I want to see a SpongeBob vape in the flavor described as unicorn vomit? Of course not. Nobody does. That shouldn't be authorized, and it never will be. But a normal vape that describes the flavor accurately, honeydew melon, says tuning, okay, it tastes like honeydew melon, and you know what you're getting when you buy it, that seems to make a lot of sense to me. And by the way, putting Bluetooth technology on a device that will absolutely guarantee that nobody over 30 will ever use it for any reason is one of the very worst public policy ideas that's floating around in the universe right now. I just can't let that. I can't let the opportunity to say how much I object to that go.
There we go. Lily's at the microphone.
Lily McKinney. I've been away for a while, but I'm back. Dave, you said that using flavored vapes is a trend among you. Was a trend. Or a fad. What's the next fad? Let me give you an idea of some of the questions we've been getting. Mitragynine, crab, 7-hydroxy. Far more addictive than nicotine. And I'd worry more about that than flavors, actually. Then the other thing, we're getting inquiries about betel nut. That seems to be the hot ingredient, which we all know that's a IR1 carcinogen and highly addictive. So how do we get ahead of the fad? How do we deal with the real issues? I like talking about flavors, but the next things that are coming are far worse than flavors.
Thank you, Lily. I would like to comment on that just briefly, and that I think you're absolutely correct in using the term fad, especially as it pertains to devices like Juul. We took a generation that loves their gadgets and anything that can be plugged in to a USB, and gave them something new to play with, and the fact that it was illicit and risky. I know many of us have, well, not many of us, but I know a few that may have teenagers and young adults in this room. Engaging in high-risk behavior comes with the territory of having a teenager or young adult. So fad is an excellent word usage, and I agree completely. There are way more dangerous things out there.
Yeah, you make a extremely important point. And I think it was at this conference, either last year or the year before, that, you know, I mentioned this as a warning to, and others have done the same thing. But this is the problem with not having honestly created a regulated marketplace, because we've had political leaders that have been so hyped up, spun up, misled on this particular issue with hundreds of millions, and I'm probably undershooting it, of dollars being spent to convince them to quash this opportunity for both youth and therefore for adults. That, yeah, companies in industry will always look for the next thing. I mean, cannabis, flavored, edible, gummies, I mean, liquids. I mean, youth are using those products, yet you don't hear any of the same hue and cry, anything close to it, from the same folks that are complaining about flavored nicotine with dramatically decreasing rates. So it's, a large extent, really politics. Government is always behind industry, and I think industry writ large knows that. They try to catch up because of certain issues, and meanwhile, these other real, what I would argue are much more significant, much more dangerous problems are not being addressed. So as it relates to nicotine, I just think that we would all do ourselves a disservice and do public health a disservice if we don't use this moment to get this right, settle this particular issue, and frankly allow government officials to focus on things that are going to pose a lot more risk to public health, to youth or adults.
I like your question, and you know, the truth of the matter is, adolescence is a time where kids are programmed to take risks, and unless you want to send your kid off to like a weird risk-free education camp, things are going to happen, and nobody actually wants to do that. And all of us who've had kids watch them do things and mess up and make mistakes or drive poorly, and it is part of the process, and it's scary when it happens, but the alternative of having a kid that hasn't experienced the actual world would be worse. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying to educate kids about real risk. We should be trying to tell them what will happen if you get yourself addicted, even to nicotine or to other products. We should tell them that the drug supply for things like Adderall that looks like prescription therapies is tainted with fentanyl. We should be telling kids the truth. And by the way, again, just another thing, you know, telling an adolescent a noble lie is one of the most dangerous things you can do, because not only does it not work, they'll remember it their whole life. But do engage with them, tell them the truth, try to reduce risk. I love some of the things that public health are doing. I see them investing in youth cessation programs for vaping. That is great. A kid that wants to quit should get all the help they need. Do things that lead into agency, that respects their intelligence, and do your very best, but realize you can't cure the world.
Just to add off of both Tony and Dave agreed, Willie, you always ask the hard questions, so gotta give you props for that. Just to add on to that, I think, you know, one step in the right direction is kind of what we've already seen of the authorization of ZYN. That's a step in the right direction of continuing to get access to reduced risk products, so that FDA needs to continue that direction to prevent, you know, these more dangerous fads from rising.
All right, if there are no more questions in the room for right now, I'm going to move to a couple that we've gotten through the app. And the first one, I believe, is in response to a comment by Tony, which is, how can you say there is a prohibition if there's actually a regulatory pathway to flavored products being authorized? There are 4 menthol products that FDA determined met the APPH standards, so it is possible for flavored vapes to legally be marketed.
Got it. Because it's a joke to say that 1 to 4 products that have one flavor is enough to satisfy what consumers in this country are demanding. So it is a rhetorical statement that this is tantamount to prohibition, but which it is, because if consumers cannot get access to that product, then they can't get access to that product. If the regulation has been set up so that one product can get authorized, I don't know what you would call it. I call it a ban. I mean, let's be real when we talk about particularly when we talk about, like in your study, when they are given an option of a variety of flavors or a tobacco flavor, what do they choose, right? So, I don't know how else to say it, but 30 million smokers and 18 million vapors or 15 million or whatever the numbers are, a couple products that are one flavor doesn't seem to cut it. And that's what the regulation has given us. And kudos to the company that got it through. And kudos to Zyn, PMI for getting Zyn and all those flavors authorized. But what has it taken to get there, and what has to have been overcome to get there? It certainly isn't a situation where the regulation itself is actually designed to get as many less harmful products to the market as possible, because it's just been used in the opposite way. So.
Now, and I would just like to also comment with some of the data that we've also talked about and seen this afternoon. If 70% of the 15 million vapors are using products that are of flavors and from companies that have not been authorized, there's a problem. Because even if there are products authorized, the majority of vapors are not electing to use them. So that's a problem to be solved. I'm sorry, we have several other questions on the app, but please, if you have any additional questions, we've got about 13 minutes left, so please come up and ask them. We have a question, do you think reduced risk products will ever be regulated like pharma? And then I don't know these acronyms, so whoever asked this may actually have to explain what they are, or have its own, I'm assuming, GVP equivalent. Not familiar with GVP, so someone may have to actually spell that out for me.
It was me, I was just lazy to go to the marketplace.
Sorry to push you on the spot. I'm sorry?
Which pharmacovigilance practices?
Okay.
Kind of how you have the GXP pharma, but we have tobacco practice policies to follow. What do you think the FDA will get?
Are you talking with manufacturing, for example, like TPMP? Within industry, okay. Thoughts?
I didn't hear the first part. Basically, it's saying, should we have good practices like the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, do you think that the FDA will ever get to that point and regulate this like they do with pharma?
So as a commercial tobacco product, no. I mean, there are the two pathways, right? If a company wants to make a therapeutics claim, then they have their pathway. So there's little interest. That doesn't mean that we can't get closer in terms of standards. I mean, really it comes down to science. And are we actually going to have scientific standards that are articulated for industry so that we know exactly what needs to be provided against what level of data must be provided, how that must be provided, and what the results must be. This doesn't have to be kind of this, process, which is kind of, it's like waiting for white smoke. That's what we have lived through for some companies 9 years, some companies 5 years. Like, the mystery shouldn't be on the back end. It should be laid out, everything should be laid out on the front end, so that a company could actually say, okay, here's the product I want to bring to market. I'm going to design it to meet these standards. And then we're not waiting on the back end. The back end should be what David was talking about, is post-marketing review and control, and making adjustments. But in the meantime, all we're doing is keeping regulated products out of the hands of consumers, which is serving nobody's purpose, while authorizing thousands of combustible products because they can.
I mean, we're doing something equally stupid, which is we're not really keeping them out of the hands of consumers. We're just saying, hey, consumers, we've totally given up. Buy whatever you can at Joe's Vape Shop across the street, and it'll be great. And
Joe's a good guy.
he is great, yeah. But I mean, I was on a stage with Stacy Ehrlich in 2016, and I believe it was Stacy who said, hey, well, if I was the FDA, I would probably try to put together an OTC monograph so people would know what they're doing. It's like, oh man, and that would be really hard. That would probably take 3 or 4 years. That would have been 2019, and now it's 2025, and still nobody has any idea. And it's not like you're frozen forever. It's you come up with good manufacturing standards. Somebody is like, hey, we could really improve the HVAC model if we use this for the heating element. And it's like, boom, you have a new standard on heating elements. You give everybody 18 months to switch. That's what a regulated industry looks like. But what that requires is for the regulator to quit treating the regulated industry like it's a rogue opponent determined to destroy society, and instead treat it like every other regulated business and do your best, understanding that you're never going to get rid of the demand for nicotine and you're never going to reprogram people to not want drugs, and operate in reality in a way that is the very best you can do for the public health, given that reality.
And just don't forget, in 21, CTP had a process for handling flavors, and that got changed in a period of 14 days. And ever since then, look what's happened. Just imagine, had that process actually been allowed to play itself out. Just imagine if that process netted a variety of flavored vaping products, also netted a number of products being rejected. We wouldn't be sitting here going, what is going on in this marketplace? Because we would have actually had a process see itself through. Those are not the way regulators should be making decisions, and now we're living with the consequences.
So, 1 second, I just wanted to say that you're absolutely correct, and one of the key concerns that I've had is that enforcement discretion was never meant to be never ending. And it was never meant to cover entire marketplaces. It was supposed to be a finite amount of time in order to allow the regulators, the manufacturers of the products, to, whether they were coming from the same direction or different directions, to actually meet in the preparation and in the establishment of a regulated market. So we haven't done that. It's not supposed to be forever, is the point with enforcement discretion. So that's something to just keep in mind. Sorry, go ahead, please.
I have a long question.
You have 2 minutes.
Wow. My name is Jacob James Rich. I'm an analyst at Reason Foundation and a PhD student at Case Western. And I'm curious whether you guys think MRTP, Modified Risk Tobacco Product Certification, is constitutional. In my opinion, I spoke at FDLI last year on this, and it looks like they are not satisfying the Hudson test, meaning that they have an explicit statement of what the regulations are supposed to do, and they're not accomplishing it, which means it's unconstitutional. So I'm curious, do you guys think they're constitutional, and whether there's any appetite in the industry to actually challenge the constitutional grounds of MRTPs?
You're the scientist, you answer.
Yeah, exactly. The lawyers will stay quiet. Look, the fundamental.
Dave, hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
So keep it very brief.
The fundamental intent of the First Amendment is that you can tell adults true things even if you don't like what they do with the information. Under that principle, it's obviously unconstitutional. I don't think there's a lot of industry. I don't think there's a lot of reason for people to want to upset the cart on this. I think they'd rather work with the regulator. I think there's lots of reasons to want to do that. But as a matter of constitutional law, I think it's clearly unconstitutional in this space.
Okay, we have one more question online. I'm so sorry, but this is one that pertains to flavors, so I'd really like to get your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts about marketing restrictions that would ban the use of certain descriptors in a flavor name? Example, words like candy, cereal, cookies. Would that help reduce the moral panic over kid-friendly flavors? And I think this ties in very nicely with constitutionality and what we were just talking about, so I want to make sure we had a couple minutes.
Take the first stab at this one. From a behavioral and perceptual standpoint, I spent a lot of time in my graduate program doing linguistics and developmental language development. Words matter. Fundamentally, how you frame things is very important to matter. So I do think that's a step in the right direction. There's no reason to put qualifiers for things like the candy flavor. Just give us the flavor name, or heck, just give it, variant one. Does it need to have a name, a catch-all or catchphrase? No, I don't think so. So I think that's a step in the right direction to demonstrate, we're taking responsible marketing and not targeting specific populations.
Yeah, I think at the risk of violating the First Amendment, I think that those restrictions are appropriate. I mean, in all seriousness, like, at some point, we have to draw the line. If somebody wants to sue on that, then they should sue. But there are rational marketing and access restrictions that we've been pushing for. But they have been overwhelmed because nobody really wants to talk about restricting marketing to kids, possibly taking into account some of those things, are the reasons that kids say they were actually vaping. Instead, they just then hung up on banning all the flavors, as if that is in and of itself marketing. And so, yeah, I think that whoever asked that question, that there are restrictions that we push for along exactly those same lines. It's not the flavor that's relevant from a marketing perspective. You can limit what it's called, just don't make it tasteless.
I think so long as you allow the manufacturer to accurately describe what the consumer experience will be, restricting things like unicorn vomit or super duper cherry bomb or something like that is not really a First Amendment issue, and it's probably, I think, a reasonable response to the real problem of potential.
All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. We have about a minute. If anyone has a very short question they'd like to ask, so not Willie. He knows I'm teasing. Thank you all very, very much, and thank you so much to our panelists. This is obviously a very important conversation about how to balance the use of flavors to help adult smokers without risking youth. So thank you so much, and thank all of you for coming here today.